Welcome to the Blue Mask Knits. My name's Emily, and today I'm going to teach you how to knit this cable cowl. You'll need some super bulky number 6 yarn. I used 1 ball of Big Twist Natural Blend, and you'll also need a set of US 13 9mm needles. And since this is knit flat, you can knit it as long as you want and change the circumference of it. And this cowl was very mildly inspired by Fern's cowl in Frieren Beyond Journeys End. I didn't really have any purple yarn on hand, so this was the closest I could do, but I really like the double cable feature. I think that kind of looks very similar. There's a free written version if you prefer that. You can find that linked down below in my Ravelry shop. That's pretty much it. So let's get started. To begin, you'll want to cast on 29 stitches. The sample uses a long tail cast on, but a standard beginner cast on would also work really well. So a long tail cast on puts you on a wrong side row for your first row. So for our setup row, we're going to purl across, but if your chosen cast on does not do that, you can go ahead and skip this row. And then for row 1, which is a right side row, we're going to slip 1 as if to knit with the yarn held in the back, and then knit 12, purl 3, knit 13. So the yarn is in the back of our work, and then go into the first stitch as if you're going to knit it like this, but just slip it to the right hand needle, and then knit 12, and then purl 3, and end with a knit 13, and then turn your work. And for row 2 and every other wrong side row, we're going to slip 1 purlwise with the yarn held in the front, purl 12, knit 3, purl 13. So you want the yarn in the front of your work, go into the first stitch as if you're going to purl it, but just slip it to your right hand needle, and then purl 12, knit 3, and purl 13. Turn your work, and you're going to repeat rows 1 and 2 one more time. And now we get into our actual repeat. So go ahead and slip the first stitch with the yarn held in the back of your work as if to knit, and then we're going to cable 6 front. So there are several ways that you can do this. You could use a cable needle, you could use a double pointed needle, which I happen to have in the correct size, a pencil or another knitting needle, really whatever you have on hand. I'm going to kind of hold on to this other needle, and I'm going to slip the first 3 stitches on the left hand needle, go into each stitch as if to purl, and slip them to the cable needle or the extra needle. And I'm going to hold it in the front of my work like this. So the yarn's still attached to my right hand needle. I'm going to kind of try my best to ignore this. Go into the first stitch on your actual left hand needle and knit it. And then you want to pull the yarn extra tight after you do that. And then you can knit 2 more normally. So we have our slip stitch, and then we have our next 3 knit stitches. Since these are the same size, I could technically knit off of this, but I find it easier just to slip the stitches. So I'm going to slip them from the extra cable needle onto our regular needle. Without twisting them, you just slip it back to your left hand needle. It will feel very weird, but this is my left hand needle, this is my right hand needle. You're going to knit 3, and that was your cable 6 front. So it looks extra bulky, but it will kind of flatten out a little bit as we go. And now you knit 6, and now we purl 3, and then we work that cable 6 front again. So take your extra needle, slip the first 3 stitches from your left hand needle onto that spare needle, and hold it in the front of your work. My yarn is attached to my right hand needle. Try your best to ignore that extra needle and knit off of your left hand needle onto the right hand needle. After that first stitch, you want to pull a little extra tight and knit the remaining 2. So here's our 3 knit stitches, and now I can slip the cable needle stitches back to my left hand needle without twisting them, and knit 3. And that completes our cable 6 front. You want to end with a knit 7. Row 6, which is a wrong side row, you're just going to repeat row 2, So with the yarn in the front of my work, I'm going to slip the next stitch as if to purl, and then purl 12. The cable stitches will feel a little bit tighter than the stitches before them, but then you should come to your 3 knit stitches. So knit 3, yarn to the front, and purl the remaining 13 stitches. Turn your work and bring your yarn around to the back. Row 7, which is a right side row, you're going to repeat row 1. Row 8, which is a wrong side row, you're going to repeat row 2. Row 9, which is a right side row, is our next cable row. You begin with a slip 1 with the yarn held in the back, and then knit 6. So I like to bring the yarn in between the needles to the front, and I also bring the right hand needle to the front just to get that out of the way. And then slip the next 3 stitches as if to purl onto a cable needle or something similar, and then hold it behind your left hand needle. So just kind of rest it in the back of your work like this, and then you can bring your yarn in between your normal needles, but still in the front of your cable needle. And then just kind of ignore that. You can kind of get that out of the way and knit 1. Pull the yarn a little extra tight and knit 2 more for a total of 3. And then bring the yarn in between the needles to the front and slip those 3 stitches back without twisting them. Bring the yarn in between the needles to the back. Should look like this, still connected to the right hand needle, and knit the next 3. And then you can purl 3, knit 6. To make it easier again, bring the yarn in between the needles to the front. Bring your right hand needle to the front just so that they're out of the way. Slip the next 3 stitches from your left hand needle onto a cable needle or a double pointed needle. Hold it in the back of your work. Then you can bring the yarn around in between your other main needles, but still in front of that cable needle. Knit 3. Pull extra tight after that first knit stitch. Yarn to the front, and then you can slip those 3 stitches back to your left hand needle. Bring the yarn in between your needles to the back. It should be kind of unobstructed. Knit 3. And then knit the final stitch. And that's how you work a cable 3 back. Rows 10, 11, and 12. You repeat row 2 for the wrong side rows and row 1 for the right side rows. And then you're going to repeat rows 5 through 12 until the cowl reaches your desired length. You can stop after a row 8 or row 12 repeat. You don't have to work the full repeat. For the sample, I worked 9 full repeats of rows 5 through 12. And then I worked rows 5 through 8 one more time, and that used just under 1 ball of yarn. But this is fully customizable. You can work as many repeats as you want. Once your cowl is about as long as you want it to be, it's time to bind off. We're just going to work a standard knit bind off, and we're going to do it on the right side of your work, so the side with all the cables showing. So in order to work a standard knit bind off, knit 2, hold on to the one closest to the edge, pass the first one over the second and off. Wiggle it around a little bit to loosen it up. Knit 1. Pass the first over the second and off. Wiggle it around. And you just keep doing that across. Knit 1. Pass over the other. Wiggle and repeat. And when you get down to the final stitch, you can just kind of pull it out into a giant loop. Cut the yarn, leaving a tail long enough to weave in. So I want to leave the tail at least 3 times the width of my cowl. So the width of your bind off edge. That final stitch, you can just kind of pull it out. So just pull all the yarn until the tail pulls through. And at this stage, I would block your cowl. So I would probably pin this out. If you have any pins, you could use sewing pins or T-pins or anything like that. I would pin it out, and then I would probably steam it, but you could also wash it and pin it out and let it dry. That will make it look a lot neater before you finish it. I'll show you how to seam your cowl. So I'm going to fold the ends together until they meet, and I'm going to pin them together. You don't have to do this, I just think it makes it slightly easier. You could just turn this inside out, pinch the ends together, and seam it. That would be very, very simple. I'm going to show you a neater way to do this, and I'm going to turn it around so that if this is my cast on tail, this is my bind off tail. You can weave your bind off tail through a yarn needle. I'm going to be using a contrasting color. I'm going to go into this corner here on the right hand side, about where my cast on tail is coming from, up through the middle. I'm going to go up to the top and find what looks like a V. So you can go in from the edge a little bit and find one. Here's a V right here. So I go over and find the next V, which is right about here. So I'm going to go underneath both legs of this V from right to left, pull through, and then I'm going to go down, and where my yarn is coming out of, I'm going to go back into that hole and go over until I've picked up 2 legs. You've got the first leg here and then the second leg, but you can think of it as just going back in the hole where your yarn is coming out of, pick up 2 legs, pull through, go up to the top where your yarn is coming out of, you go back into that hole, move over until you've picked up 2 legs. So we've got a V with a left leg and a right leg. So we've picked up both, so you can pull through, go down to the bottom, find where your yarn is coming out of, go back into that hole, and go over until you've picked up 2 legs. So you can kind of see here on the bottom half that when I do this, you've got kind of 2 V's here, and you're picking up the left leg of one and the right leg of the other. This just makes it look a little bit neater. If yours is off, don't worry about it. It's really not a big deal, especially on a cowl. Go back to the top, find the hole where your yarn's coming out of, go under both legs of that V and pull through, go to the bottom, back into the hole and pick up 2 legs. So it's the left leg of one and the right leg of the other. And you just keep doing that. Should look something like this, although yours will be in the same color. After about an inch or so, you can pull on the yarn to close it up, and it should start to look like this. If yours starts to pucker, you just pull it apart, and it should flatten out a little bit, but you just keep doing that all the way across. And then once you get to the purl section, it may be a little bit more confusing, but you just find where your yarn's coming out of. So my yarn's coming out of this hole right here, so I go into it, pick up 2 legs or 2 bars, whatever you want to look at them as, pull through, go down to the bottom. This one's a little bit easier because we did one setup row before, so yours still kind of look like normal knit bars. Go back to the top where your yarn's coming out of, which is right here, and pick up the next 2 bars. Go down to the bottom, pick up the next 2 bars. So it doesn't change a whole lot when you switch over to those few purl stitches, but you can keep going on, and every couple of inches you want to pull on the yarn to close up the seam. And when you do, if it gets kind of puckered like this, you just pull the edges away from each other, and that should flatten it out again. But then towards the end, if you have to kind of fudge it, you can. But here's one of our final stitches. Go down to the bottom. Our yarn's coming out of this hole, so still feels a little bit weird, but we're just going to grab what looks kind of like 2 legs. It does not have to be perfect. And then we go to the top, back into the hole where it's coming out of, next 2 legs, and there's like half a stitch left at the top. I can go back into where my yarn's coming out of, just towards the edge there, and at the top do the same, just go into where the yarn's coming out of and out towards the edge. You can pull on the seam to close it. But that's what the seam looks like. Looks nice and neat, and it makes it look like the knit columns run into each other. That's why we kind of do them a little bit offset, because it creates this almost continuous look. You can definitely tell there's a seam, but the V's line up with the V's. So go ahead and turn your project inside out. I don't go back into where the yarn's coming out of. I move over a couple of stitches, but we've got like these raised bumps. So I'm just going in the raised bump from one side to the other. And I just keep moving over a stitch or two and then pulling through. And then I'm going to go back, not into the hole that it's coming out of, but over to the left a little bit. Just to kind of overlap. And that is good. So I'm going to trim. I'm going to cut it, leaving a short tail. And then I can move over to the other side. And you should only have one more tail left. I have several because I used a contrasting color. But you would thread your final tail through a yarn needle and do the same thing where I don't go back into the hole it's coming out of, but I move over into a different part of that raised bump, pull through, and you just keep doing that. Move over a little bit and alternate sides. And then after a few times, you go back in the opposite direction, never going back into where your yarn is coming out of. You don't want to undo it. And then trim. If your cast on tail is not on the wrong side of your work, just thread it to the wrong side of your work and then weave it in. But there you have it. That's what the seam looks like from the wrong side. But then if you flip it over, this is what it looks like from the right side. So this will most likely be at the back of your neck anyway, but it's a very, very pretty seam. So there you have it. That is how you knit the Fern cowl. I really hope you enjoyed this pattern. If you did, please give the video a like, share it around with any of your knitting friends, and remember to come back to the Blue Mouse Knits for all your knitting needs.